Hi everyone, it's Laura here for Studio Katia, and in today's video I'm going to share with you a Christmas card that I created combining Christmas and non-Christmas stamps, and I'm also going to feature the new Studio Katia Blending Brushes. I started off my card by stamping the images on some Nina Solar White 110 pounds cardstock with Spectrum Noir Finesse black ink. This is an alcohol-proof ink, and I chose that because I'll be using my Illustrator markers by Spectrum Noir to color all the images. The poinsettias and the rest of the floral images are part of the Merry Poinsettia stamp set, and then I thought it would be fun to use the KOBI Bearing Gifts stamp set for a Christmas card. This obviously works great on birthday cards too, but I thought it would be perfect for this card with KOBI bearing all these Christmas gifts in this case. For my coloring, I chose a color palette which is close enough to a traditional Christmas palette, so I have some greens and some reds, but the greens are slightly more blue and the reds are slightly more pink than the classical Christmas colors, and this was just to bring a little bit of variation in my cards and try out something new. To color KOBI, I'm using some cool gray markers and I am shading the image as if the light is coming from straight ahead, which means that I'm going to have the center of his belly being the lightest and the shadows will be on the sides of his belly and of his legs and of his paws too. I used IG6, IG4 and IG2 and I made sure to leave my highlight white, and I'm using my colorless blender to blend everything out towards those white areas so that I have a nice and smooth transition. And then I moved on and started working on the presents. I wanted the card to be nice and colorful, so I used several marker combinations to color in my presents. For this first one, I'm using DR6, DR2 and PP5 to get a bit of a pinkish red. Then I'm going to use some teal blues, and these are BT5, BT3 and BT1. Next, I'm going to use my JG colors, so I have JG5, JG3 and JG1. And I'm also shading the presents by keeping the sides darker and the bottom darker too and the centers lighter. This next color combination is MG5, MG3 and MG1, and then I have one more green color combo which is a bit more of a yellow-green, and that is DG3, CG3 and CG1. Those darker teal blues are BT9, BT7 and BT5, and I used those markers because I wanted to add a little bit of color variation without having to introduce necessarily an extra color family. So you can always use the markers that you have, but in darker shades to add more color variation and more interest to images where you have a lot of components, like in this case we have a lot of presents to color in. I am then going to move on and use those same reds, greens and blues that I used so far to fill in the rest of the images. And if you're interested in the blog post that will be linked in the description box down below, you will not only find a list of all the supplies that I used today, but also a color chart where I will list all the markers that I used for this card. I finished coloring my presents and then I moved on and started coloring the poinsettias, and I am not going to show the entire coloring for the floral images because I think that once I show you what I do for part of them you will get the hang of it and it will not be necessary to have this video last too long. What I did is I started by laying down my shadows in the central part of the petals and towards the base using my DR6 marker and some flicking motions that will create texture in the flowers. I then went over and extended those areas with my DR6 marker, and I left some space for my highlights that I filled in with my PP5 marker. And in order to get enough contrast and a lot of nice texture, I'm also going to go in with a second layer of color on each petal, repeating exactly the same process, so going with my DR6, then the DR2 and finally the PP5. And I repeated this for all the petals until I was done coloring both the flowers. And the markers that I'm using right now to color all my floral images, so including the leaves and the berries, are the same that I used on KOBI's image. And this is because this way I'll make sure that all the elements on my card are nicely tied together and there is some harmony between the different components. For the leaves, I used JG7, JG5, JG3 and JG1, and again I'm adding the shadows towards the center and the bottom of the leaves, and I'm blending them towards the highlight using those flicking motions that create such a nice texture in floral images. And also in this case, I'm going to go in with a second layer to intensify the contrast and increase the texture. On the side there I have some berries that I colored with some yellow greens, but instead I decided to go for some cool grays, so there I used IG6, IG4 and IG2, and I'm also going to stamp and color a couple of extra berries off camera so that I have enough for my final composition. And here are all the images die cut with the coordinating dies to the stamp sets that I used today. I also did some more die cutting off camera, and this is some watercolor cardstock. The oval shape was cut with the dotted patterns set 3 dies, the scalloped rectangle with the scallop frames dies, and that A2 sized rectangle was cut with the darling ribbon and frames dies. One of the new items in the Studio Katia store are these blending brushes. It was my first time trying them, and I have to say that I really love how soft the blend is and how they actually feel soft. You can also get this nice CADDY here. As you can see, it rotates and it holds up to 10 brushes. It's really convenient and I love the way it looks on my desk. And you can also get some caps to protect your brushes. So I started doing some ink blending with my Distress Oxides on the base panel. This is die cut at an A2 size, so 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. And I first went in with one layer of tumbled glass, but I realized that I wanted the base panel to be a little bit darker. So once I'm done with this, I'm going to actually go ahead and blend my Peacock Feathers Distress Oxide directly on top. I checked my background against my card with the images there, and that's when I figured out that I wanted this panel to be a little bit darker. As for the brushes, you can modulate the amount of ink that you get on them by how much you press and rub them on your ink pads. Here you can see I was experimenting, and you can load them up with a lot of ink, as I hope you can see from the video. Or you can go with a little bit of a softer hand and get a more subtle result. I'm cleaning my brush on my microfiber cloth because I want to be doing some very soft ink blending with tumbled glass on that oval panel, but before that I decided to bring a little bit more interest to this panel here by spritzing some water and blotting off the excess with a microfiber cloth. I am now using my tumbled glass over this die cut oval, and what I'm doing is I am loading the brush with a little bit of ink by not pressing too much. I'm dabbing off the excess on my glass mat, and then I'm lightly dragging my brush over the panel to get this very nice and soft blend. It fades into white really beautifully, and I have to say that I really loved the feeling of using these brushes. And I can't wait to play with them a little bit more. Once the Distress Oxide was dry, I went ahead and stamped the Be Merry sentiment over this oval die cut panel with VersaFine Onyx Black ink. And the reason why I waited for my Distress Oxide to be completely dry is that I wanted to be doing some heat embossing with clear embossing powder, and I didn't want the embossing powder to stick to my Distress Oxides. I coated the sentiment with the powder, and then I used my heat gun to heat set it until it was shiny and smooth. And then I decided that I wanted to add a little bit more interest to the central panel. So what I did is I mounted the smaller images in the Mary Poinsettia stamp set on a Studio Katia round acrylic block, and I'm going to stamp them randomly over this background. I wasn't really able to see a lot of what I was doing because it was pretty dark in my room at the time, but basically what I tried to do is to get enough coverage on this panel. Also, most of it will be covered by the images and by the die cut oval, so I wasn't worrying too much about it. Once I was done with the stamping, I coated everything with clear sparkle embossing powder by Wow, and I heat set that with my heat gun too, and this will bring some nice and subtle shine to the background panel without adding extra color to the design. At this point, I could go ahead and start adhering everything. I'm using some strong double-sided tape to glue all the panels together because I had a little bit of warping due to the heat embossing, so the strong tape will keep everything nice and flat. I first adhered the scalloped rectangle to the base panel, and now I'm going to glue the oval to the card front. I'm going to center it and then also position it on the lower portion because I want some space on that top left corner for my poinsettias. Before adhering my images, I mounted everything on a top folding A2 card base cut at 4 1/4 by 11 inches and scored at 5.5 inches. And then I'm going to glue down my images using my Studio Katia glue. And the reason why I'm using some liquid glue at this point is that I want to have a little bit of time to move all the elements and make sure that I get an arrangement that I like. And while the glue is still wet, I have some time to move things, as you can see I was doing with the berries and the leaves at the top. I adhered the flowers and KOBI in two opposite corners of my card front. I filled in the flowers with the berries and the leaves, and then it was time for the finishing touches. Because I have that glitter embossing powder on the white panel, I decided to bring some glitter to the images too, so I used a Spectrum Noir clear overlay pen to coat the center of the flowers, the berries, and also some of the details on the presents. I didn't coat all the presents and I also didn't cover the entire petals on the flowers because I did want to add some glitter, but I wanted a bit of a more subtle effect. But if you want, you can go all in and coat everything with this clear overlay pen and the result will be gorgeous. As a last step, I adhered some icy sparkle crystals to my card front. These are clear but have some glitter in them, and I thought they were the perfect accent for my card. And here you can see the final result. I really loved the way this card turned out, and it was a lot of fun to combine more traditional Christmas stamp sets with non-Christmas stamp sets, and I think these two work really nicely together. And that's it for today. I really hope you enjoyed this video and I hope I inspired you to create with the Studio Katia Mary Poinsettia and the KOBI Bearing Gifts stamp sets. Don't forget to subscribe for more inspiration. Thank you all so much for stopping by and have a great day.